Good evening. I'm Jeanette Rodrigues, and it's my absolute pleasure to be speaking today with Rana Ayyub, a journalist based in Mumbai, India, and a global opinions writer for the Washington Post. Rana, thank you so much for being with us this evening.
Thank you, Jeanette. It's an absolute pleasure to be speaking at the SOPA Awards.
Rana, we're both sitting in the same city, and unfortunately, we can't be recording in the same room today because there's a pandemic raging in India. I want to start with that. Even amidst the humanitarian crisis that we're seeing in India, there are concerns about censorship. There are concerns that the government is censoring the bad news that's coming out of this massive humanitarian crisis. You yourself have alleged that your own tweets are being censored in this climate. What's your opinion on what's happening in India and, of course, around the world as well?
Well, Jeanette, unfortunately, with authoritarian regimes around the world, this is a norm that when a crisis happens, especially when a humanitarian crisis or a disaster wherein the government is complicit, the first thing that they attack is the freedom of speech, is those speaking truth to power, is kind of in a way stifling free media, and that's exactly what's happening in the country. 2 weeks ago, we had two cover stories, one by Time Magazine, one by India Today. The Time magazine cover says Modi has been unable, to kind of save the country, and he has left Indians to fend for themselves. And you had the India Today cover, which showed the dead bodies but refused to ask accountability of Narendra Modi. So that's a difference right now. We see a great deal of self censorship in the Indian media because, of course, the government has there is an atmosphere of fear, but fortunately, we still see a lot of journalists, especially in rural India, the Hindi newspapers like the Dainik Bhaskar, which have been reporting, which have been speaking truth to power. When the government is fudging data, they have come with headlines about the uncounted deaths, especially in rural India, where one reporter said that in 1,000 kilometers, he counted close to 2,000 deaths, and that's something which is not being reported by neither the government nor the mainstream media. So that's like that's a big disparity. Also, as far as the tweets are concerned, yes, the government has suspended 52 tweets or removed 52 tweets that have been critical and that have been talking about data being fudged by the Modi government. My own tweets have been deleted. A couple of days ago, I complained about my Facebook page, which is a verified page, being removed by Facebook, which is being unpublished by Facebook. I still can't access my Facebook. So the government has tried to shoot the messenger as opposed to making sure that the virus that is ravaging the country, it helps people on the ground. It, in fact, has chosen to stifle the voices and the ears and the people like us who have been, reporting the truth. That's a trademark characteristic of any authoritarian regime, and that's exactly what the government is doing, Janet.
Rana, but you very correctly also spoke about very brave journalists, especially in rural areas, who are not only risking their health, but also risking the government's wrath by going out and putting out these reports about people who are dying, people who are suffering with no access to healthcare. So journalism doesn't seem to be a very dark spot right now. There seems to be some hope around the world.
Absolutely, and especially in a country like India, it's the local journalists, the unsung journalists who have been reporting, who have been reporting from rural India. For instance, I was writing this report for the Washington Post where I spoke to at least three local journalists from Uttar Pradesh and Bihar. And these are people who do not have any health care, who do not have any medical insurance. These are independent journalists, often referred to as stringers. And I have great disdain for that term, stringers, because these are people who actually do the ground reporting while most of us get the bylines. So you see them reporting. And when I spoke to one of them and I said, "Can I quote you for my Washington Post report?" And he said, "Please don't do that because I am working in a state where the government has given, where the Yogi Adityanath government, the chief minister of the largest state in India, has threatened to file a case against anybody who speaks about oxygen scarcity or deaths due to COVID. So please do not mention me." And it felt like a stab because these are the people who are doing the real hard work. These are people risking their lives. They are reporting from crematoriums. They are staying at crematoriums all day, counting the number of deaths. One journalist sent me a video where 425 funerals took place in a day. It is a devastating time for the country, and at this point of time, journalism needs to be, India needs its journalism to hold those in power accountable. So yes, while the gatekeepers might and the mainstream publishers, the mainstream editors might not be allowing the headlines to be scathing, might still be complacent, might not be calling the prime minister for his accountability. We have these journalists who are speaking truth to power, who are very unsung, who are unlike us, who don't have high profile Twitter bios, who don't have the world listening to them, but they're still doing work that needs to be lauded and supported.
Rana, you mentioned this term gatekeepers, and I want to ask you more about that. Because really there's a sense of polarization about the media globally, where the elite seem to control the flow of news. In India, of course, there's this allegation that the international media is out to malign the country. There's a certain section of the media which is only publishing negative news because they want to create a bad perception of the establishment. Where does that leave us as journalists? And especially, where does that leave journalists in villages and rural areas who just want to speak about the lack of basic facilities and probably just speak truth to power and actually help livelihoods in their hometowns?
I think, Jeanette, the gatekeepers, whether they are in India or whether they are in any part of the world, especially I can talk about the Indian in the Indian context. Most of the big publications, the big television networks, the mainstream publications like the Times of India. Now, these are controlled by big business interests who need to keep Modi in their good books, who need to keep the government in their good books. You have the industrialists, some of the biggest industrialists controlling the Indian news channels, owning the Indian news channels, plus they are worried about their advertisers. So I think there is a great deal of self-censorship by our gatekeepers. Everybody tries to draw parallels between United States and India, saying, we had Trump there and we have Modi here, which is why even through this devastation, the COVID-19 devastation, they're still basically making efforts to stay in power. But I would beg to differ. The difference between the United States and India is the United States has a robust press, a robust media, where a New York Times or a Washington Post will question Trump on its front page, will name names, will put the names of those who are dead on their front pages. We did not see that in India. So while local journalists were testing positive for COVID without any health cover, without any insurance, while they were reporting, the gatekeepers were censoring the news. These news stories were relegated to the inside pages. So I feel terrible for these journalists who have been risking their life, and to what end? I can say that I was jobless till 2013 when I left my job at Tehelka, and in 2014 when Narendra Modi came to power, and I used to go for interviews at various publications. The first thing that would be said to me was, you can report on anything except Modi. And I remember telling one editor that I'm not into pimping yet. And since then, I've been jobless till such time that I got hired by Washington Post in 2019 as a global opinions writer. But even with the coverage in international publication, you see the Times Network, which is one of the biggest publication in India, do a 1 hour program reading out headlines by New York Times, Washington Post, Time Magazine, um, which holds Narendra Modi accountable, and calling it some sort of a sinister conspiracy, where journalists who are reporting for these organizations are allegedly getting funded by the CIA, not looking inwards. So you are questioning what the Wall Street Journal or what Time Magazine is writing about India, what Le Monde is writing about India, but you're not willing to introspect that why does it take international publications to speak the truth about India? And it's not just about COVID-19. You saw when the special act in Kashmir was revoked, you see Indian journalists going to Kashmir, holding an apple in their hand, saying everything is normal, while journalists who were working with the BBC or international publications, bringing us the reports of human rights violation, of youngsters being detained in jails in Kashmir. So I think there are two truths which are operating in the same country. There are two narratives. One narrative that is published in the international publications by Indian journalists, and the other narrative which is published in Indian publications. It's only now when the pandemic has struck everyone without discriminating. Earlier, it used to be the lower class, lower caste, Dalits, Muslims. Till then, it was fine. But now, because it has impacted the upper class India, you see the publications kind of trying to find their voice, because they think, oh, it's impacted upper class India. We must now speak. So I really have a grudge against these gatekeepers because they suddenly are talking about democracy in peril. But democracy is in peril for quite some time in India, where the minorities were being lynched on the streets, when farmers were being treated as anti-nationals. I really would have wanted to see robust journalism in the country, which which did not which wasn't very visible because of our gatekeepers, Jeanette.
Rana, this dichotomy that you mentioned, where it takes the Western media really to talk about some of the issues that allegedly the Indian media doesn't want to talk about. This brings me to the question about the use of English as a gatekeeper. While it's easy to say that a lot of the Indian media doesn't bring out the issues that might be difficult for the government to hear, you yourself are somewhat of a gatekeeper now, given your access to the English-speaking press, given your columns in the Washington Post. How can someone who, firstly, is this fair that the English language is treated as a gatekeeper? It allows a certain set of journalists an unfair voice in the world. And secondly, you yourself having transferred yourself from being a journalist with no voice to somebody as some sort of a gatekeeper, how are you managing this transition?
I'm glad you asked this question of me, Jeanette, because somewhere down the line, we must account for our own privilege. As English speaking journalists, I remember there was a time when I had recently joined the print publication and I wasn't very conversant in English. I studied in a vernacular medium. I remember a lot of people would mock my English, would mock my grammatical mistakes. I, of course, I don't think I've come a long way, but I still want to begin with talking about my privilege when I write for the Washington Post, I write for international publications. I'm profiled by the New Yorker. I have the United Nations special rapporteurs writing to the Indian government to protect my safety. Now that's a huge privilege that I must acknowledge that probably the vernacular medium has no access to. I have access to those in power across the world. So I myself am a gatekeeper in that sense. So what does one do when one goes on from being a reporter to a gatekeeper? One is more mindful. One is more mindful of the fact that, you have seen what it takes to make a difference. You have seen what it takes to reach where everybody aspires to. So what do then? You then try to uplift those who do not have a voice. You then try to amplify the voices of those who are not seen and heard by the world. Look at me. If something happens to me tomorrow, I remember in 2018 when a pornographic video emerged with my image morphed on it and was shared all over the world. I had access to the New York Times writing an editorial for them. I had the United Nations outrage and speak to the Indian government. Not the same thing happens in rural India to a journalist, where patriarchy is a norm in India. There's so much patriarchy. It's characteristic of where we operate in the Indian culture. Now, if there was a journalist operating in the rural heartland, if something like this happened to her, a pornographic video with her image morphed on it, the first thing she would have to do is, make peace. One should not have access to legal help. Second, she would have to kind of leave the profession because she would have to justify this to her family, wherein she's already fought with them to enter the profession. It's a fight for them every day. What we take as granted is a fight for them every day. She would not be allowed to do the journalism that I am doing because she would be slut shamed. She would be slut shamed in rural India where I might have access to a high profile lawyer, she might not have. So one does have to realize one's privilege while one is talking about gatekeepers, while one is talking about censorship. I am a gatekeeper now, in some sense, which you rightly pointed out. So what do I do? So when I hear about these voices, I need to amplify them. I need to make sure that their stories are published. I'm trying to do my best. Is that enough? No. I think I can do more. I think my colleagues can do more. So yes, English language journalists have greater access, and that's a prejudice that not just India, but people across the world are dealing with. You see, the journalists who are counted as heroes, who find their way on the cover of Time magazine or who are profiled by the New Yorker, are always English-speaking journalists. how many regional language journalists are given the kind of recognition that they deserve. I saw this journalist reporting from Palestine who was risking her life to speak truth to power. I wish she was given that kind of coverage. I wish, she left her 4 children home to report in the midst of the bombardment and the bombing. I sometimes wish there was an everybody operated on equal footing.
Rana, which brings me to my next question about social media. There are some in the media who say that social media, Twitter, Facebook, offers a platform for those who don't have this traditional media platform, for someone who doesn't have the time cover at their disposal, for someone who does not have the Washington Post. You have also seen in your experience that social media can be a double-edged sword. Where are you now on this balance between a force for good and a force for evil when it comes to social media and speaking truth to power, or just speaking truth, really?
Well, social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, which is now being increasingly used to kind of talk about news. Now, it's a devil that we have chosen to use as a platform because especially for independent journalists, there are no gatekeepers on social media, at least from my personal experience. I remember when I left the Helka in 2013 and I did not have access to any publication. I was not hired. I was a freelancer. I was an independent journalist. So posting my stories, posting my views on Twitter made sure that my voice was amplified. So it is a huge boon for independent journalists. There's a young journalist from Uttar Pradesh who's been reporting on the carnage. And I remember I posted his video tagging him on Twitter. And since then, he has become the go-to person for a lot of international media personalities. So yes, Twitter has amplified the voices of those who are unsung heroes. At the same time, it really has its own pitfalls. For instance, the kind of social media hate campaigns that journalists, not just like me, but many journalists in India are facing these concerted attacks where you are trending every day on social media. Just this morning, a right-wing website has posted a ridiculous and devastating hit job on me, and it's trending since this morning. So it does impact. It does numb you for a bit. There is this concerted social media campaign. It numbs you for a bit. And we all know that social media platforms in India have been enablers of Narendra Modi, and not just in India, but they have been enablers of authoritarian regimes all over the world. So one must call out their complicity when they are suspending Twitter accounts, when they are suspending Facebook pages, when they're not allowing even journalists like me to kind of boost my stories on my Facebook page because it violates their policy. And what is the violation of the policy? That these are stories critical of Narendra Modi. So yes, while social media is not completely free and fair, in the absence of gatekeepers who kind of which we face in journalism organizations, it allows us to express ourselves as a democracy where everybody has now become a journalist. Everybody has now become everybody is now blogging, is finding a voice, is talking about whether it was a cyclone in India yesterday, where you and I were both in Bombay and we realized there was no Wi-Fi, but people were exchanging videos, people were exchanging news stories about deaths and through social media. So it's an extremely important platform, but it does not come with its share of drawbacks. So we must learn to kind of accommodate and use it in a way as journalists to our advantage. Jeanette?
Rana, so you mentioned that there are allegations, of course, that the government censors social media. The government on its part says that we don't censor social media. We are asked by our citizens to censor news that spreads hatred, that incites violence. However, I think both the government and journalists are in agreement that one particular dirty area of social media is where female journalists, women journalists are targeted, not just for their reports, not just for their reporting, but also for areas which the male journalist might not be attacked on. There are rape threats delivered on social media. You're no stranger to them. How have you learned? What has your experience taught you on how to deal with these situations? And given your experience, would you change any of your decisions that you've made so far?
Well, Jeanette, a lot of people who watch me tweeting, and these days Twitter has this new option of not letting people, only people who you follow reply to you. But sometimes, because you're so used to kind of using Twitter in a way that you have been using it over a period of time by not filtering your voice. So a lot of people, when they read my tweets and they read my responses, they say that they go numb with the kind of hatred that they see coming towards me. Like sometimes I just have to put a full stop, like just one dot, and there will be 1,000 replies to it. Most of them misogynistic and what most women face in India. I also have the privilege of being a Muslim in India, a Muslim in Narendra Modi's India, who happens to be critical of Narendra Modi, who sent the Home Minister of the country, Amit Shah, behind bars in 2010 for his role in the extrajudicial murder. So I had the distinction of being called a jihadi Jain, where everything that I tweet is viewed through the prism of religion, is viewed through the prism of misogyny, where the attacks on me and other women in India are mostly gendered. So you don't have men having their images morphed with women, but you will have women in India having their images morphed with Indian politicians, which are in opposition to Narendra Modi. And the kind of hate that you get, you wonder why is this so forceful? I remember when that porn video was disseminated all over the country and everybody was sending that video to me on WhatsApp. I remember I broke down, and I remember I could not, for 3 days, I could not take a shower because I was numb. I had anxiety attacks. I was sent to a hospital. I was admitted to a hospital because my blood pressure shot up. And I said, you know what? I called my parents and I said, I can't do this anymore. I'm going to quit this. I can't deal with this. And I kept telling them, I think I'm humiliated. And now in the feminist worldview, if you allow something like this, a lot of my friends said, how can you say you're humiliated? But when patriarchy is the foundation of everything in India, when I saw the video, I felt like I was made a free for all for the rest of the country, which was watching that porn video and thinking of me as this woman who is promiscuous. And despite that person not being mean, I felt like I was made a free for all, and I felt like if I stepped out of the house, people will have judgments about me. And it felt so damning that I just wanted to give up journalism. I remember when I wrote the New York Times piece, I said, if this is what you wanted to do, you wanted to kill my spirit, you have done that. And then I think something that my father said that really struck me. He's also an old school writer and a journalist, and he said, this should have happened to you long ago, given your work. They are doing this to kind of stifle your voice, to silence you. Can't you see this? And I realized that yes, I was hitting a raw nerve. They are doing this to me because they have tried every means to silence me. They have tried Twitter attacks, they have tried death threats. My colleague Gauri Lankesh, I remember I was talking to her in 2017, a night before she was assassinated. She was talking about, she had translated my book Gujarat Files in Kannada, regional language, and she was shot dead the next day. And her words continue to haunt me. She said, we are being targeted because of who we are and what we speak. And that made me realize that if I were to be silenced by these social media campaigns, I would have given them the joy of knowing that they had defeated me. And if I were to be defeated, there were so many women journalists who look up to me, who send me messages on Instagram and Twitter. I'd be defeating their spirit too. So it made me realize that all this concerted campaign on social media was an attempt to silence me because somewhere my voice mattered. And the day I realized that my voice mattered, I just became immune to it. I just said, do what you want to. I've seen the worst. How much worse can you really do after this? After my character assassination, after morphing my image, what worse can you do? You can only kill me, right? Which I don't think they will. I have the privilege, like I said, I'm a public figure, so they can't do that to me. But they have done the worst, and I am ready now to face them head on.
Rana, you of course were speaking about this incident where a morphed video of yours was circulating in an attempt to defame you after you wrote something critical about the authorities. But as you said, you've turned that around. You've created a brand for yourself. That outspokenness has actually worked for you. What's your advice to young journalists? How do they create a brand for themselves? And also, how do they create an authentic voice for themselves that's heard around the world?
Well, Jeanette, honestly, I was quite a shy person to begin with. I remember I went to a girls' school, a girls' college, a girls' degree, a girls' postgrad because I was scared. I was always the last. I was always the backbencher. I failed class 12. I was seen as the person who could do nothing in life. And I remember at the age of 19, I went to Gujarat to to basically work as a relief worker during the Gujarat riots. And somehow, the kind of injustice I saw there when 1,000 Muslims were massacred in the span of a week, I felt a strange helplessness, and the only thing that I could do was to be outspoken about it, because I realized that the only thing that works in the world, in the face of everyday criticism, is to maintain your truth, is to maintain a truth, however unpopular that is. Now, if that helps to create a brand in a country where people are as much outspoken but are self-censoring their voice, it was never a choice. It was never something that I planned to be a brand in myself. No, I did not want to create a brand. I just wanted to do what my journalism college told me to do. They said, when you go to interview a minister or anybody, you're not supposed to drink anything more than a glass of water, because then you're obliged. So I'm trying to follow the old school of journalism, where I was told that one needs to speak truth to power. So when I go to journalism colleges and they said, we would like to do what you want to do, what you do, and we would like to be like you, and I keep telling them, as if glamour, if getting on television, if seeing yourself on television is what you is the reason behind you wanting to join television or journalism, then don't do it. Don't do it for the wrong reasons. Do it because you have that fire in your belly, that you want to take the system head on. And a lot of people call me an activist for that reason. I say I'm not an activist. Just because I speak my truth with a passion does not make me an activist. It only makes me an active journalist. I've often been accused of being very passionate when I speak, and I'm often being accused of taking things too personally. Now, I don't know how does a journalist not take things personally when he or she sees injustice right in the face. I don't know how do you remain objective, especially at a time like this in India, when you see a carnage unfolding in the form of COVID-19, when hospitals are running out of oxygen and people dying. So if a young journalist goes and cries, seeing this bloodbath, how does that person remain objective? So my advice to young journalists is, it's not about creating a brand, is reporting what you see with all the sincerity. A lot of them tell me that, oh, you can afford to speak that truth because you don't have to pay loans like us, you don't have children, you don't have to take care of anyone, and we have to pay loans and we have to pay bills. And my only response to them is, if you really had to pay your loans and bills, why join journalism? You should have done PR or anything else. I know it's a privileged position to say that, and I'm quite privileged to say that because I'm sitting in Bombay with my parents paying for my bills, with I managing a good salary to kind of look to have a lifestyle. But I've come a long way from holding tripods for journalists. I worked hard, and destiny, of course, really helped. To all the journalists who are listening this, I just want you to know that nothing is impossible. For a journalist like me who could not even speak English, I wanted to defeat my detractors. I wanted to tell them that, you think that a woman cannot report on politics. In my first job, my bureau chief said, women should report on lifestyle and entertainment. They should not report on politics because it's a very male domain. It's something men do. So today when I do that, a part of me feels great. So don't let anybody stifle your voice. Don't let anybody tell you that you cannot do this. And if they tell you that you cannot do this, prove it to them that you can do this.
Rana, final question to you. What next are you out to prove? What's your next big project?
Well, Jeanette, while I'm the global opinions writer with the Washington Post, while I write publications, I still think I'm giving opinions. While a lot of my opinions are based on my reportage. I go to Kashmir, I report on what's happening. I go to other places, I'm reporting on the carnage. I'm doing relief work, but I'm joining a publication called Substack from July onwards, wherein I will be back to my reporting jobs. I'll be back to doing investigations, which I so love. And I'll be back to in a way, trying to reach out to journalists and make sure that in some way they can work with me. So from being an reported opinion journalist, I'm back to being a full-time journalist because that's where I derive my strength from my reporting. Anybody I think can write an opinion. These days, opinions are everywhere. Everybody can write an opinion. But I think my strength lies in my reportage. I am where I am today. And I want journalists to hear this, that We might be writing opinions for international publications, but we are doing this because we have the experience and we have seen it all from close quarters. So I really want to use my expertise in reporting. So I'm going to be back to reporting. I'm going to be back to speaking truth to power. I'm going to be reporting from areas which have gone underreported, especially during COVID-19. We are witnessing the second wave now, and we are being told that we should be ready for the third wave. It's a devastating time for India. And I think India needs journalists more than opinion writers at this point of time. So that's my next, that's really the next in my list of things to do, Jeanette. And I hope people continue reading me, continue hearing me, and continue hearing voices that are being stifled. Continue listening and amplifying the voices of women journalists, specifically amplifying the voices of journalists from minority communities. In the Indian context, I would say amplifying the voices of Dalit journalists. We need them. We need to hear their lived experience. Oftentimes, lived experience is considered a drawback. I think lived experience is our strength. The reason I am being able to say what I am unfiltered is because I have lived that experience as a Muslim in India. So I hope to continue to do that, Jeanette.
I wish you all the very best in your new endeavor, Rana. And thank you very much once again for joining us.
Thank you so much, Jeanette. It was a pleasure talking to you.